Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this alternate table configuration. We took a break from our COCOM PA conference to be able to do this, so our apologies. We didn't have time to reconfigure the room like you're used to. Hopefully some of you who cover the State Department and other places might find this more familiar and to your liking. Pleased to have with us here for his update for the week, Colonel Steve Warren from Operation Inherent Resolve. Steve, we will turn it over to you for opening questions, and as always, folks, just signal me and I'll get you on the list here for questions once he's done. Steve.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it, and greetings, Pentagon Press Corps. I want to start today and mention, of course, France and our condolences to all those victims there. The morning after those attacks, I had the opportunity to sit and have breakfast with a French officer who's here on 5 Union with us, and his family's fine. They were in Marseille, but it's something that we certainly felt here. This is a coalition that over time becomes a lot like a family, so our thoughts and our prayers and our hearts are very much with the French. So on that note, I would like to run you around the battlefield a little bit before we go to questions. So the map should be up right now, our main map, and I'd like to start with Raqqa, which is, of course, blue circle number 4 there on your map. Since Saturday, France has conducted numerous strikes against targets in Raqqa. Those targets include ISIL headquarters, training camps, and storage depots. The French have been a robust partner and a robust member of Operation Inherent Resolve. They were our first NATO partner to strike Iraq in September of 2014, and they've conducted about 12% of all of the non-U.S. strikes in Iraq and Syria so far. There are approximately 240 French troops here in Iraq training, advising, and assisting the ISF. Finally, the deployment of the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle will, we believe, add significant strike capability to the coalition. Before we move on any further, I do want to quickly run through the rest of the battlefield and the operational picture. So, in the Syrian Euphrates River Valley, Operation Tidal Wave 2 continues. Early Sunday morning in Abu Kamal, which is the southern blue circle number 2, you see 2 blue circles there. They both represent Tidal Wave 2 operations, but we're in the southern one, the one further towards the bottom of your screen there. In Abu Kamal, we destroyed 116 tanker trucks, which we believe will reduce ISIL's ability to transport its stolen oil products. This is our first strike against tanker trucks, and to minimize risk to civilians, we conducted a leaflet drop prior to the strike, and we did a show of force. We had aircraft essentially buzz the trucks at low altitude. So I do have a copy of the leaflet, and I've got some video. So why don't you pull the leaflet up, and let me take a look at it so I can talk about it. So you can see it's a fairly simple leaflet. It says, get out of your trucks now and run away from them. A very simple message. And then also warning, airstrikes are coming. Oil trucks will be destroyed. Get away from your oil trucks immediately. Do not risk your life. And so these are the leaflets that we dropped about 45 minutes before the airstrikes actually began. Again, we combine these leaflet drops with very low altitude passes of some of our attack aviation, which sends a very powerful message. We also have a video, so Divids, if you can show that video, please. So I think those videos were a little bit dramatic. I think the first and the last one were bombs, and in between, of course, you saw strafing runs from their A-10s and the other C-130s that were out there conducting this operation. So I'd like to move on, go back to the battlefield. If Casper or Tom, you could pull up the Al Hall map, please. So continuing our tour of the battlefield in Al Hall on November 14th, the Syrian Democratic Forces liberated that town. ISIL held Al Hall for the last 9 months, but they retreated as the Syrian Democratic Forces approached. The SDF capitalized on this retreat and reclaimed nearly 200 small villages from ISIL control. During the 2-week campaign for Al Hall, friendly forces reclaimed 730 square kilometers of territory, and of course the coalition supported. We conducted 79 airstrikes that killed over 300 enemy fighters and destroyed 105 ISIL fighting positions. We also recovered significant amounts of enemy equipment that was abandoned. If we can go back to the main map now, this is our last map of the night. This is on the map with the red on it and the stars. If you see in the lower left-hand portion of that map, star number 7. This is a new star. On November 15th, the new Syrian forces, trained by the coalition, conducted a mortar raid on an ISIL stronghold in the tri-border area near Antanf. This was the first operation of its kind in southern Syria. 5 buildings and a weapons cache were destroyed. Moving on to Iraq, I'll start in Mosul, which is circle number 1, blue 1 in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. That's Mosul, where we continue our disruption operations in the Tigris River Valley, which includes Beji, Mosul, and Hawija. We've conducted 105 airstrikes since October 15th. In the vicinity of Sinjar, further west, which is star number 3, the coalition has conducted 290 airstrikes since October 15th. Peshmerga have secured Sinjar, established a new forward line of troops, and continue their clearance operations there. Finally, along the Euphrates River Valley, which includes Ramadi, Fallujah, and Abu Hayat, we've conducted over 190 airstrikes since October 15th. So these are all the whats, and the important, I think, question is always the why. And the why is, and the why I tell you all this is because I think it's important for everyone to understand our overarching objective, which is to partner with indigenous ground forces, enable those indigenous ground forces to conduct offensive operations, and then provide coalition air power on top of those offensive operations. As indigenous friendly forces maneuver against our enemy, it causes our enemy to move. The enemy has to react. And as soon as the enemy reacts, we kill them from the air. So I think that's my overall message here. This is an operation. It spans the breadth and the depth of this battlefield, now going as far south as the tri-border area, as far west as the Mara line, and as far east as really Beji. So that concludes my opening remarks, and I guess AP, if it's Lita or Bob, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Steve. Can you hear me? Yep. All right.
Can you hear Bob?
Okay. Steve, I have a question that goes to this this question that's been raised about the overall pace of the campaign, particularly the air campaign. You mentioned that the French in recent days have hit numerous targets in the Raqqa area, training camps, storage depots, headquarters buildings. Some people would ask why those kinds of targets, which seemed like good, obvious targets, why they haven't been taken out before. I mean, is the Islamic State adding to its infrastructure and expanding, or why were those kind of targets not already hit?
Yeah, fair question and a good question. So the way the targeting process works, you know, as we strike a target, say we strike a headquarters building, and it will obviously some enemy fighters will be killed in that headquarters building strike, but not all of them. And so the enemy then needs a new headquarters building. So they will reposition whatever's left of their equipment out of that headquarters building, and they'll gather up other bits and pieces of equipment and establish a new headquarters building in a different location. So then it takes us time to work the intelligence piece to determine where this new headquarters building is, and then to strike it. So this is a continuous rolling process. Everything from fighting positions, which can be freshly dug, to communications nodes, which can be repositioned either based on by the enemy based on tactical situation, or repositioned because they've been struck and damaged. So it's a rolling process to identify targets, vet those targets, ensure that those targets meet all of our standards for the reduction of civilian casualties, the mitigation of the potential of civilian casualties and collateral damage, and then we strike those targets. So it's a continuous rolling process.
Hey, Steve, we were told that for the first time the Russians reached out to the Americans a few days back and said, we're going to hit Raqqa. Have there been any other communications along those lines with the Russians? And also, President Obama said, I welcome the fact that they are now going to step up some of the strikes. And he added, quote, we are actually helping facilitate them doing so. What was the president talking about there?
All right, so the communications piece first, Tom. As you know, several weeks ago, we established a system that would allow Russian headquarters and coalition headquarters, in our case it's the CAOC, to reach out to one another and warn or advise of an upcoming operation so that we could deconflict, right? This is all about safety and deconfliction so that there are no incidents in the air. And so this is what happened. Now, we actually test that communication channel almost daily, so we know it's a good channel. But in this case, it was actually used for the first time. So the Russians contacted us and told us what they were going to do, and we acknowledged it, and everybody continued on with their missions. It's important to note that the Russian actions in Raqqa here recently had a minimal impact on our coalition operations, very minimal. As far as what the president said, certainly I'm aware of what the president said. We right now here on the ground are not in any type of communications or coordination with the Russians. So that's something that's being worked at a higher level.
Okay, and getting back to Raqqa, as we all know, the Russians are not using precision munitions. Any sense of any increased civilian casualties in Raqqa as a result of that?
We don't have a great read on the civilian casualty piece now. It would come as no surprise. As you noted, the Russians are using dumb bombs. Their history has been both reckless and irresponsible. I know there was some discussion that the Russians had a large air armada flying into Raqqa to conduct these operations, and it was notable to us in that those are antiquated tactics. We don't even use those type of tactics anymore. The idea of putting 10 ships in the air at one time, or 12, or even more, are very old-fashioned. And those are the type of tactics needed only if you don't possess the technology, the skills, and the capabilities to conduct the type of precision strikes that our coalition conducts. So uncertain on the civilian casualty piece at this point. We are, of course, continuing to monitor it closely.
Steve, Jim Miklaszewski, following up on Tom's question. In addition to what the president said, the Secretary of State, John Kerry, said he could see the U.S. and Russians working together, flying together, side by side, I think is what he said, in Syria and perhaps Iraq, I guess. Is the U.S. military leadership there, either there or here in the Pentagon, as far as you know, prepared to fly side by side with the Russians?
Well, the U.S. military, of course, has the greatest aviators on Earth, and so they're capable of flying with anybody. That said, we right now have no plans to conduct coordinated operations with the Russians.
Actually working together in combat flight operations, side by side, with the Russians at this point?
Yeah, right now we have no plans to do that. You know, if told, we're capable of executing any mission that we're given. Again, you know, we have the best aviators, the most sophisticated technology anywhere on Earth. But right now we have no plans. We're not coordinating with the Russians. We're not conducting operations with the Russians, nor are we planning to do any of those things here at the ground level.
On Bob's question too, if it's so important to cut off the oil shipments, the critical revenue source for ISIS, why did it take so long to take out 116 oil tanker trucks?
No, that's a great question, Jim. Thanks for asking it. So a little history on Operation Tidal Wave 2. Initially, we've been striking oil infrastructure targets since the very beginning of this operation. What we found out was that many of our strikes were only minimally effective. We would strike pieces of the oil infrastructure that were easily repaired. When we came to that realization, we conducted some more study. I think I talked about this last week a little bit. We conducted some more study and determined how to better strike the oil infrastructure itself, different pieces of the system. And during the course of that study, we also determined that part of the illicit oil system, from the oil coming out of the ground at a pump head to the end of that chain, which is the distribution network. So this is a decision that we had to make. We have not struck these trucks before. We assessed that these trucks, although they are being used for operations that support ISIL, the truck drivers themselves probably not members of ISIL. They're probably just civilians. So we had to figure out a way around that. We're not in this business to kill civilians. We're in this business to stop ISIL, to defeat ISIL. So we spent some time developing some TTPs that I read out earlier, the leaflets, the low pass. We did some, I didn't mention in my opener, we did some strafing runs as well to kind of shoo people away without harming them. So we had to go through that whole process of, one, determining whether or not we felt it was in our best interest to strike these trucks. And then once we determined that, yes, it is in our interest to strike these trucks, how do we go about ensuring that we're able to mitigate the potential of civilian casualties? And these things take time. So this was an iterative process down here at the very lowest levels, all the way up to the very highest levels of government, as we discussed this and worked our way through this problem set of, how do we get at this oil? Because we know the oil funds more than 50% of ISIL's operations. And this is something we want to take away from them. We need to take this away from them so that their operations are more difficult to conduct. So long answer to, I guess, what was a long process of discussion, of analysis, and then finally decision.
Hi, it's Phil. Did the Russians hit targets that were in the U.S. or the coalition queue in Raqqa? And have there been any more communications with the Russians since the one yesterday where they advised the U.S. of their upcoming actions?
Phil, we're still analyzing specifically what they hit. It's there was some cloud cover, and so we don't have the situational awareness that we'd like when there's cloud cover like that. So we're still working through the process of determining specifically exactly what the Russians hit. They did not, when they communicated with us to let us know that they were preparing to do strikes in this region, they did not give us their target set. So now we're going through the analysis piece to try to determine exactly what they hit. Right now, I've seen no indication that they hit any targets in our target set. That said, they were attempting to strike ISIL targets because ISIL is who's in Raqqa. What was the second part of your question, Phil? I forgot. I'm sorry.
Indication?
That's right. Yeah. So as of now, so again, we test our communication line daily. So I'm not going to count that as a communication. So, I mean, we speak to a Russian every day, but it's purely a communications check. So as far as a deconfliction, a formal deconfliction, no, that hasn't happened again since the initial one.
And then just to be clear, since the Russian strikes, there's been some reporting out of the region that ISIL leadership or some families that are linked to ISIL are moving out of Raqqa, and they're moving out of the city. Have you all seen anything like that to back that up?
We have not seen ISIL forces. We have not seen ISIL move forces out of Raqqa. I'm not going to get into our observations on their leadership. This isn't the right place for that.
Hi, Colonel Warren. Just to follow up on Bob's question, when the French nominated targets after they were hit in Paris, I guess they had about 10 targets that they were going to hit. How were those targets nominated, and were there actually ISIS casualties as a direct result of those hits? There's been some question as to whether or not the French and maybe even also the Russians were shelling empty targets or targets that were no longer viable, had been hit before.
Well, there's a couple of pieces to that question. You know, we often hit targets. We reattack targets all the time. So that's a very common practice for us to reattack a target. So there's that. I don't have a casualty count for the French strikes, but what I'll tell you is those targets that they struck were vetted. They were appropriately researched, vetted, and queued up targets. So they were targets that were in the slate to get hit eventually. So we don't have a good battle damage assessment. We rarely get that from these type of pre-planned strikes. We can get the, we can get the battle damage assessment on people usually through the dynamic strikes. But from these pre-planned strikes, we rarely get that kind of battle damage feedback ever in other strikes as well. So.
And just one follow, CNN had reported that 33 ISIS leaders might have been hit as a result of the last couple of days of airstrikes. Anything you can say about that? And then on the fuel convoy, were these 116 trucks, were they all queued up to go over the border, or were they scattered in various places? Could you describe the scene a little bit for us?
Right. So the trucks. So these trucks were queued up. They were sitting sort of on flat desert. There wasn't really anything recognizable as a road around it. We're just kind of out there on the desert floor in the vicinity of one of these oil fields, one of these oil facilities that we've been striking. So they were queued up there waiting to take on their illicit oil. And, because we had struck some of these, because we had struck the facility that they were queued up out of, the flow of oil obviously was severely, if not completely, constricted. So there was this backlog. The trucks, some of them had left earlier, some of them were still there. So there was this kind of, I think, some confusion on the ground, it appears. So these trucks they were just sitting there, not moving. So we dropped our leaflets, we did our low pass, we chased any of the truck drivers away, and we destroyed them. So they weren't moving. They were all, as you saw in the videos, they were all stationary. Nothing was driving anywhere. So it was a pretty straightforward, attack. It's notable. I forgot to tell this story. In one case, we did see some civilians run away from their trucks, but for some reason they ducked into a tent that was maybe 100 meters or so away from where these trucks were congregated, and they were bumper to bumper, these trucks, in many cases. And so the civilians ran into this tent, and because of their proximity to where they were and what they were doing, these truck drivers were absolutely legitimate military targets. But in a great sense of what we're all about here, those pilots made a decision, from the cockpit, that they could accomplish their mission without striking that tent and without hurting any of those civilians. So that's something I just wanted to share. On the leaders, 33 leaders killed. I'm familiar with CNN's report. We don't have any leadership HVI announcements to make today. And we will continue to announce HVIs as they come up.
Thanks. Hi, Colonel Warren. Good to see you. Just on these 116 tanker trucks. Do you have any idea how much revenue that the loss of these trucks is going to cause ISIS?
Well, we haven't done the math on these 116 trucks. What we have done the math on is Operation Tidal Wave writ large, which we believe that the oil facilities inside of Operation Tidal Wave in this region, in this Dar ez-Zor region, accounts for approximately 2/3 of their oil revenue. Accounts for about 2/3 of the revenue that ISIL makes by selling oil. So by destroying this chain, because remember, you can't look at it as trucks. The trucks are just one link in the chain. There's trucks, there's wellheads, there's pumps, there's separators, there's collection points. So it's a chain. And the trucks are kind of at one end of the wellhead is at the ground. You know, that's where the oil comes out of the ground. That's the step one in the chain. And the truck, that's the last step in the chain. And so what we've done in Operation Tidal Wave is break every single link of this chain so that it becomes much more difficult for them to reconstitute. So I don't have the math on these 100 trucks. No, I don't have it.
Was very helpful. Also on France, you said that France was conducting about 12% of the non-U.S. airstrikes. How many of the airstrikes are U.S.?
A majority. I should have looked up the percent. It's over half. Over half are U.S. We can get you that exact number. Send me a note and I'll send it to you.
One last question about the Russian airliner that was bombed. There were pictures today from ISIS saying that the bomb was in a soda can. Do you have any comment? Have you seen any sort of bombing tactics like that? And is this just turning into a point where the world cannot find a way to predict how to stop these bombs?
Yeah, that's a little bit outside of my lane here. I'm just a soldier, Carla, so you know we kind of handle soldier stuff here. You know what I'll tell you is that ISIL's decision to start expanding their operations outside of their own borders is something that should concern everyone, and it's the very reason why we're here. Now, whether or not they are doing this as a result of the fact that they have been dealt several blows over the last several months, and this is a reaction to that, or whether or not this is something that they are doing offensively is a question I think is worth asking. I don't have the answer, but this is all indicates exactly why this is a serious threat, and it's why the 65-nation coalition has come together to try and dismantle it.
Colonel, it's Jamie McIntyre. I'm never quite sure whether you can see us or not, but so let me know. But my question is about Secretary Kerry in the last couple of days has several times mentioned that the United States is working with Turkey to try to close or seal off the remaining open border between Syria and Turkey. Can you give us an idea of what that operation would entail and what the U.S. contribution would be? Does it involve any U.S. troops on the ground in Turkey? How is the U.S. helping Turkey in this sort of joint effort? Can you paint a picture for us?
Thanks, Jamie. I can see you. So you've got a blue shirt on. So there's one last. I don't know. Is the map up? If the map's up, let's take a look at the map here. So the last part of the border that remains open is just a little bit to the right of blue circle number 3 here. We call that the Manjib pocket, and in fact, well, actually, it's not quite on the map. It's really off the map. So actually, where the blue circle number 3 is, that's the Manjib pocket, and to the left of blue circle number 3, sort of off the edge of the map, is where the Mara line is. The Mara line is the line between ISIL forces on the east and moderate opposition forces to the west. And that little bit of red that you sort of see there underneath the blue 3, that's the Manjib pocket. And that's the last piece of border that ISIL controls. That's the last piece of the Syrian-Turk border that ISIL controls. So we are working diligently in several ways. Number one is our ongoing Mara line operations, which I've talked about almost every week here, and it's even on our map is number 3. So as friendly forces push east from the Mara line, the idea is that they will link up with friendly forces that are on the other side of the Manjin pocket and seal that border off. So that's step one. And as you know, the new Syrian forces, the Syrians who we exfiltrated out into Turkey and Jordan, and we trained them, and then we infiltrated them back in, those forces are on the ground operating right now, this very minute, along the Mora line, and they're helping identify targets, and they're using the skills that they learned from us, to rally their colleagues and cohorts. So that's step one of our operations to try to seal the Turkish border. Step two is on the Turkish side. So, and that's working at a slightly higher level. There are no American forces conducting operations in Turkey, so I'll be clear about that right up front. But certainly at the governmental level, we are working with the Turks on finding ways what we can do, what can we do. Is there any type of equipment or any type of advice or any type of expertise we can provide that will help the Turks ultimately seal that border. I'm not prepared to detail specifically what all it is. Most of it is at a different level than the Joint Task Force here. It's more at the intergovernmental level, but that's the other piece of that.
Hey, Steve, it's Christina. It's good to see you. You know that France has conducted 12% of the non-U.S. airstrikes. Do you expect to see that number grow?
Well, we're encouraged by the fact that the Charles de Gaulle is en route to this theater. So with that additional influx of aircraft, I do expect that the overall percentage that the French are contributing will grow. Yes.
Question: have you seen, or do you expect to see, ISIS adjust to protect its oil infrastructure, and position the trucks somewhere else near civilian targets and such?
Well, ISIL is going to have a hard time adjusting to this because of the way we executed this operation, very similar to Tidal Wave 1 back in the 1940s against Nazi oil fields in Romania. This was not a piecemeal execution. This was a sudden strike. This was a tidal wave that swept across these oil fields and has really crippled them. So this was an extraordinarily, we believe, effective operation, Tidal Wave 2. So they're going to have, their problem now isn't adjusting to our strikes. Their problem now is trying to figure out how to fix their broken oil wells.
Hi, Steve. You said that the Syrian Democratic Forces have liberated Al-Hol city and liberated also nearly 250 villages, 730 square kilometer freed from the Daesh, the ISIS forces. Could you also confirm that the second package or the party of ammunitions have been delivered to the Syrian Arab coalition forces successfully or not?
We said from the beginning that we would support the SAC, the Syrian Arab coalition forces. We announced the first weapons or the first ammunition supply that we did many weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago at this point now. Beyond that, we've made a decision not to announce further operations like that. So I've got no announcements to make other than to stand on our initial announcement, our initial statement, which is that we will continue to reinforce success.
For not announcing, while the State Department says yes, it's delivered.
You'd have to ask the State Department that.
Lucas is next.
Hey, Colonel Warren, it's Lucas. The French aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, when she arrives on station in the Eastern Mediterranean, will the Charles de Gaulle be under the Russian command or the U.S. coalition?
The Charles de Gaulle is supporting the U.S.-led coalition, the 65-nation Operation Inherent Resolve.
And just to follow to some previous questions about targets being hit, is there a catch-22 about the not striking civilians and avoiding civilian casualties when over the past year the 50 million in oil revenue generated has been going to killing a large number of civilians? Is there any risk that avoiding civilian casualties is actually prolonging more civilian casualties?
A terrific question, very thoughtful, and this is something that we as soldiers have to balance every day, and this is what commanders have to balance, and this is why the burden of command is so heavy, because we have to balance that. We have to ensure that we live up both to our moral obligation to protect the innocent and to the law of land warfare requirements to minimize the civilian harm and harm to infrastructure and collateral damage. On the other hand, what you point out is absolutely right. This enemy is ruthless. They are brutal. They are sadistic. They kill and torture for fun. So this is a very difficult balance that we have to do, and it's something that we wrestle with every single day, Lucas.
Hey, Colonel Lawrence Gordon. Just three quick clarifications on the trucks again. Sorry if I missed it, but why didn't you guys go back on the other trucks? There were 300, I think, to begin with, and then you hit 116. Why didn't you go back? But also, you described like the kind of long process to decide whether this was a legitimate target and it was in your best interest or not. At whose level was the authority? Who gave the final approval to hit these oil trucks? Was it there? Was it at CENTCOM? Was it at the OSD level or above?
That's two. What's the third? So on the other trucks, frankly, the aircraft expended 24 500-pound bombs and all of their ammunition. So they shot everything they had, and they had to go home. Whose level? My understanding, although I'll have to check the details, my understanding was this decision to strike the trucks was a CENTCOM commander, CENTCOM level decision to make.
Okay, well then I'm going to give you my third then. So are you going to go back and hit the other ones? I mean, you're not going to talk about future operations, but it would seem like an obvious target at this point once you reloaded.
Well, we're not going to detail exactly what we're going to do next. So one thing I'll tell you is that the combination of leaflets and strikes certainly sent a very clear message to these truck drivers. Remember, these truck drivers are just regular people, right? They're civilians. They're citizens of Syria. Granted, they're oil smugglers, but they're not really members of ISIL. So many of them have got the message that smuggling oil for ISIL is a much more dangerous business now than it was last week.
Hey, Colonel, it's Louis with ABC. You mentioned that the Charles de Gaulle is going to join the coalition efforts. Do you have a time frame for when they are going to arrive and when they're going to begin air operations against ISIS off the eastern Mediterranean? And with the Russians conducting their own airstrikes in Raqqa, have they given any other notifications since the first one?
Louis, the Charles de Gaulle is, as the Russians have announced, is steaming this way now. She will be on station at a date that I don't have. And of course, I think I'd really rather leave it to the French to announce specifically when she'll be on station and when she'll be conducting operations. I was trying to take a note, Louis, and I didn't take a good one. What was your second question?
The Russians gave notification of the first strike in Raqqa. Have they given notification since then of any additional strikes?
Right. Yeah. Carla asked that one too, I think. So again, we have daily interaction with the Russians on the established communication channel. That interaction is really a communications check only. Since their one notification, their deconfliction call that they made, we have not had another deconfliction or notification call.
Hi, Colonel. It's Jamie Crawford with CNN. Thanks for doing this. I was just curious if you could give us an update on the operation in Sinjar that began last week. How close are we to, are the Kurdish forces to completely liberating that town? And then just as a follow-up, if you could just give us a picture of any sort of tangible results or difficulty that ISIS is now having to resupply their population centers they hold, like Mosul, after this operation started.
So Sinjar is liberated. The Peshmerga forces are now going through the laborious process of identifying and reducing or clearing the IEDs, booby traps, et cetera, that ISIL left behind. As far as the impact on Mosul, certainly, as is always the case with logistics, it won't be instantaneous. But having severed that main artery between Raqqa and Mosul, it will force ISIL's resupply and logistics operations off the high-speed avenue of approach, and they'll have to now move through these rat lines and smuggling routes that go through the desert south of Sinjar. This will take what normally would be a several-hour drive from Raqqa to Mosul will turn into potentially days. So this will have an impact. This will cause our enemy to be less able to do what they want to do, which is to mutually reinforce their own positions. Again, this is the operational nature of what we're doing now. So pressure in Iraq, pressure in Syria, pressure in the north, pressure in the south, and what this does, and all those pressures, primarily by ground forces, but all of those pressures cause the enemy to have to make very difficult decisions, and cause the enemy to not necessarily be able to help other portions of his organization. And by continuing this ground pressure, what we see is that as you're being attacked from the ground, as was the case in Sinjar, as was the case in Al-Hal, as was the case at Tanf, the enemy will move, as a reaction to the ground pressure that's been placed on them. And that causes them to pop up and become a very easy target for our air power to kill. So this is the beauty of these combined air-ground operations. So we don't have specific statistics yet, percentage of how much Mosul will be constricted by the seizure of Sinjar. But what we do know is it will drive ISIL off the main road and onto the back roads, which will slow their operations substantially.
Hi, that's Brian Everstein. Back on the Russian contact, this strike was different not only in where it was, but also you used the term armada, and they used their longer range, the 95 and 160 bombers, likely coming in from outside airspace using cruise missiles. Does that explain a greater need for deconfliction, just the size of this strike? And now that contact has been made operationally, is there an expectation of reciprocation, or that you will see more contact like this?
Difficult to predict whether or not I think we've established this line, and so we understand that it's there, and if we feel like we need to reach out to the Russians to let them know we're about to do something, so that they can be aware that our aircraft will be in a certain area, and we'll do that for the safety of our own pilots, then of course we'll do it, and presumably the Russians will as well. I think the need for it this time, it was the size, right? I mean, in this case, these were multi-ship formations, and it was cruise missiles fired, frankly, over the Iraqi airspace. So these are areas, this is stuff that we haven't seen before. The Russians have not bombed in Raqqa. Historically, it's been coalition planes bombing in Raqqa. So, it only made sense for the Russians to alert us that they would be in the area, so that we didn't bump into each other in the air, which is the whole idea behind this communications channel. It's all about deconflicting airspace. So, yeah, that's the answer.
Just a quick one, Colonel. USS Harry Truman just got underway from Norfolk. Will she be going to the eastern Mediterranean to launch strikes against ISIS?
I don't have her itinerary, Lucas. I'll refer you to the Navy for that one. They'll have that for you.
Morning, Colonel Otto Kreischer with Sea Power Magazine. Kind of circling back on the French strikes the other day, House Armed Services Committee Chairman Thornberry yesterday, raised a question. If those strikes or if those targets were passed to the French by us, which you indicated, why didn't we hit them? And he raised the issue of what he calls the extreme micromanagement of the air war from the White House. Is there anything to that? Are we being, could we have hit those targets before, but we were restricted from doing it, so we turned them over to the French?
Thanks, Otto. I certainly am not going to wade into the politics of all this. What I can tell you is that we have struck all of the targets. We, this coalition, it's led by the United States, but it's a 65-nation coalition, right? So I mean, there's a coalition operations center that works through these targets as a coalition. As these targets are identified, vetted, or identified, nominated, vetted, and cleared, they're struck. So again, as I said at the beginning, this is a process, right? There's a rolling process. As targets are destroyed, other targets will emerge. As targets that are destroyed, maybe they'll be repaired, they need to be reattacked. As targets are destroyed and we conduct an assessment, or as targets are attacked, we conduct an assessment, we realize that we need to reattack it. So this is the nature of air warfare. It's a continuous process, and that's the case here. These were targets that were part of the continuous process. Just like we give targets to the Dutch, we give targets. When I say we, I'm talking about the coalition, right? The coalition headquarters works through these targets and divvies them out. The Canadians, every nation who's conducting airstrikes here, they receive these targets, and so this was nothing different.
Hey, it's Steve, Tom Bowman again. I wonder if you could give us an update on Ramadi. I think the last time we talked, you said they'd almost encircled the city except for the bridge over the Euphrates, and I think trouble with the river itself. And if they have completely encircled it, why haven't they gone in yet?
So the Western Axis has seen some fairly good activity. I think I mentioned that Camp OIR has not only been seized, but now cleared of nearly 30, I think it was 24, 26 IEDs that have been discovered buried in Camp OIR, which is right on the west bank of the river and overlooks the main city. The CTS have then kind of looped around, and now they're working up through there's a neighborhood that runs parallel to Camp OIR. They're working their way up through that. The northern access has met with some very stiff resistance, frankly. The enemy has put up a good fight here in the last couple of days. So they're continuing. I think it was about a 200-meter movement here yesterday. So this is slow and sometimes incremental work, but they're continuing. We believe that all the pieces are in place. The Iraqis have asked for some additional enablers, additional air, et cetera. We're providing that. So we believe that all the pieces are in place, and that that the Iraqis have a plan that's a good plan and workable, and it's time for them to execute it.
By Major General Rich Clark of the 82nd, that the Iraqi security forces outnumber ISIS about 10 to 1. If that's the case, I don't understand the stiff resistance if you're 10 to 1.
Yeah, that's 10 to 1 total. But in any attack, right, there's always a point to that spear, and when that point to that spear gets blunted against some stiff resistance, it can stop all the rest, and that's the case here. The enemy, as I've described, I think once or twice before, has put in some fairly complex obstacles, and they are fanatical defenders of Ramadi. Now that said, we've provided some very substantial air power, some very good training, and some specialized equipment to help with these problems. With the problem of this integrated defense. So again, we believe all the pieces are in place, and that it's time for the Iraqis to make this final move and get Ramadi cleared. We do believe that.
Hi, Colonel Warren. Just a follow-up on deconfliction. If there's another sizable wave of Russian bomber presence, would it be safe to have U.S. pilots operating in the same airspace at the same time, especially given that they were launching air-launched cruise missiles And then secondly, could you confirm for us that there were sea-based launch cruise missiles also involved in this latest Russian attack?
There were sea-based cruise missiles came out of the Caspian. Yes, and that's the reason we do the deconfliction, is to ensure safety. Right? Without deconfliction, without a deconfliction channel to speak to, then there's heightened risk. And so the reason we established this memorandum of understanding with the Russians was to reduce that risk. So the deconfliction calls, what it does is deconflicts the airspace, so it ensures that there aren't two airplanes in the same airspace at the same time.
Any last call? We don't have anyone else on the list. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you very much, Steve, for your time. Be safe, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, guys.